The mathematical miracle behind Allah's names, proof hidden in every verse. What if I told you that every name of Allah hides a perfect mathematical code? That Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, Al-Malik, all carry numbers that unlock secrets of divine symmetry in the Quran? This isn't numerology. It's proof that every letter, every verse, is measured with mercy. When Kareem first heard the phrase, mathematical miracle behind Allah's names, he smiled politely and brushed it aside like a beautiful metaphor people use to feel spiritually uplifted. He was a mathematics graduate, logical to the bone, raised in a Muslim family, but emotionally distant from his faith. His father was an imam, his mother a teacher of Quran tajweed, and his younger sister memorized du'as like poetry. But Kareem considered himself a thinker of the modern world, someone who believed that religion was mostly symbolism and culture, not calculation or precision. He believed in Allah vaguely, like a warm memory, but not in miracles tied to numbers or sacred geometry. All of that began to change the year his father passed away. The grief tore through the house like a storm that refused to leave. At the janazah, people hugged him and whispered, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." But those words felt like echoes bouncing off a closed door. His father had always told him, "One day, you'll see that Allah's names are not only recited, they reveal patterns in your soul and in creation." Kareem had smiled then, thinking his father's wisdom was poetic, not literal. 40 days after the burial, Kareem found himself alone in his father's old study room, a place that smelled of oud and paper. He was searching for a document related to inheritance paperwork when he came across a small, leather-bound notebook placed on the highest shelf. It didn't look like something official, but something pulled his eyes toward it. He picked it up, dust dancing in the air like tiny ghosts, and opened the first page. Written in his father's handwriting were the words, Ar-Rahman, 298, Ar-Rahim, 258, Al-Hakim, 78. You will understand this one day. Kareem frowned. These numbers meant nothing to him. Was it some kind of personal note? A code? Al-Shari numerals? He knew of the Al-Shari system vaguely, that each Arabic letter had a numerical value, but he'd never paid attention to it beyond trivia. That night, he searched online for Al-Shari values of Allah's names and discovered something unexpected. The values in his father's notes matched exactly with what scholars had calculated centuries ago. Ar-Rahman was indeed 298. Ar-Rahim was 258. He blinked at the screen, surprised at the precision. Curiosity became a quiet fire in his chest. He dug deeper, finding that the name Allah itself had the Al-Shari value 66. He started scribbling numbers on scraps of paper, cross-checking values of Al-Malik, Al-Qudus, As-Sami, Al-Basir. His rational mind was intrigued, but not convinced of anything miraculous yet. He needed more than historical numerology. One evening, his uncle Hamid visited to drop off some of his father's belongings. Among the books was a worn copy of the Quran with tabs and underlines. Kareem remembered his father reciting from it during Ramadan nights. As he flipped it open randomly, he noticed a sticky note next to Surah Al-Hashr, where some of Allah's names are mentioned in sequence. In the margin, his father had written, "The 99 names are like keys. Each number is a doorway, each repetition a map." That night, for the first time in months, Kareem couldn't sleep. Numbers formed patterns in his mind like constellations. He began counting letters and words in the ayahs where Allah's names appeared, checking translations, cross-referencing with Arabic. He found that Ar-Rahman appears 57 times in the Quran, while Ar-Rahim appears 115 times, exactly double. He double-checked 3 different sources, then checked manually in an online Quran search. The pattern held. He felt his heartbeat rise, not out of fear, but fascination. This wasn't a coincidence he could casually dismiss. The next day, he met his university friend Zaid, who had become a data analyst. Over coffee, Kareem mentioned his findings casually, trying to sound uninvested, as if he were sharing a curious fact about planetary orbits. Zaid raised his eyebrows and said, "Bro, Do you know how many variables have to align for these patterns to remain consistent across centuries, across recitations, across millions of copies? That's not random. Those words lingered. That night, Kareem sat at his father's old wooden desk with a notebook and pen, something he hadn't done since college. The quiet of the house pressed against his ears. He opened a digital Quran and searched the occurrences of Allah itself. Multiple sources confirmed it appeared 2,698 times. He didn't know what to make of that yet, but he wrote it down. Then he checked how many times the phrase Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim appeared fully, 114 times, once at the beginning of every surah except at Tawbah. But that same phrase appeared an extra time inside Surah An-Naml, keeping the count balanced with the number of surahs. That symmetry pulled something in his heart that logic alone couldn't quiet. 3 nights later, something strange happened. As he sat reviewing spreadsheets of Quranic words and the names of Allah, a power outage plunged the room into darkness. The house hummed with silence, except for the soft vibration of his phone. He reached for it to turn on the flashlight, and in that moment his elbow hit a stack of his father's books, sending them tumbling. He cursed under his breath and reached to pick them up when one thin pamphlet slid out from between the pages. The cover read, Al-Asma ul-Husna, Code of the Heart. Inside, he found handwritten notes from his father. One page contained a list of 10 of Allah's names, each with its al-Shari value, circled and connected with faint lines like a constellation map. Ar-Rahman, 298. Ar-Rahim, 258. Al-Malik, 90. Al-Quddus, 170. As-Salam, 131. Al-Mu'min, 136. Al-Aziz, 94. Al-Jabbar, 206. Al-Khaliq, 731. Al-Alam, 150. At the bottom his father had written, When man seeks to understand, Allah unveils through numbers what hearts ignore through sight. Kareem swallowed hard. His father had never shown him this. Was this meant for him? Or for his sister? Or anyone who would stumble upon it after he was gone? He continued reading and noticed something else. Some names, when added together, equaled meaningful Quranic numbers. For instance, the al-Shari value of Ar-Rahman, 298, plus Ar-Rahim, 258, equaled 556. His father's note beside it said, Look at the repetition of mercy in the book. Kareem opened the Quran and found the phrase Rama and Rahim used together repeatedly in verses speaking of forgiveness and divine care. None of it felt accidental anymore. Still, his mind wrestled. Mathematics had always been his fortress of certainty. He needed a pattern undeniable, something verifiable beyond poetic meaning. Zaid suggested using computational tools to search Quranic databases for word frequencies. Kareem hesitated, but then agreed and built a small script to parse the data. When he cross-referenced divine names, attributes, and specific verses, he found that Al-Hakim, the wise, appears 90 times, the same al-Shari value as Al-Malik. Why would two names with deeply interconnected meanings align numerically in value and recurrence? His pulse thumped. One evening his younger sister, Miriam, entered the study quietly while he was immersed in notes. She held 2 cups of tea and placed one beside him without speaking. After a few minutes, she asked softly, You're reading Abu's notes, aren't you? He nodded, but didn't meet her eyes. She sat at the edge of the chair and said, He always believed you would be the one to see what he saw. Kareem looked up sharply. What does that mean? She hesitated, then said, He used to say you think in numbers, so Allah will bring you back through numbers. Those words struck like a tremor under his skin. The deeper he went, the more the world around him seemed to echo the patterns he was uncovering. He discovered that the name Al-Ahad, the One, had an al-Shari value of 13. The word One in the Quran appeared 13 times in forms referring to Allah. The name Al-Wahid had the value 19, and the Bismillah itself is composed of 19 Arabic letters. He read how scholars throughout history, from Farahi to Rashad Khalifa, despite controversies, had noted the Quran's consistent structure around the number 19. Even the number of surahs is 114, which is 19 multiplied by 6. He felt the floor of his doubt shifting. One night, driven by a strange urgency he couldn't explain, he revisited Surah Al-Ikhlas. 4 short ayahs, but depths like an ocean. He wrote the al-Shari values of each word of the first ayah, Kul Huwallahu Ahad, and added them up. The total came out to a number that, when divided by the al-Shari value of Allah, 66, gave a whole number with no remainder. He checked it 3 times. His breath shook, but it was what happened next that broke something in him. He dreamt of his father that night. They were sitting in the same study room, the Quran open between them. His father didn't speak, but pointed to the word Nur light. Kareem woke abruptly and searched its al-Shari value, 256. Then, still reeling, he checked how many times light and its derivatives appeared in the Quran, 49 times. He multiplied 49 by the al-Shari value of Allah, 66, out of reflex, and noticed something odd about the digits of the result. A ratio that matched patterns he'd sketched days before, but dismissed as coincidence. His heart wouldn't let him ignore it now. He began to feel as if he were walking in a coded garden built centuries before, only now realizing the stones beneath his feet were arranged with intention. As the days passed, the boundary between spiritual awe and mathematical curiosity dissolved. He started re-examining the 99 names themselves. Why 99? His father had scribbled a note. Because perfection repeats without exhausting itself. He wondered if the arrangement of 99 was related to the Quran structure of 114 surahs, or the 6,236 verses, or the 77,430 words. Every time he searched, something lined up, not forced, but naturally, as if waiting to be seen. One particularly impactful moment came when he noticed that the difference between the al-Shari values of Ar-Rahman, 298, and Ar-Rahim, 258, was 40. The number of days Musa, spent on Mount Sinai. The number of years Bani Israel wandered. The number of weeks between human conception and soul breathing, according to some narrations. Even the age at which Prophet Muhammad received the first revelation. How many patterns could stack before denial collapsed? One evening, while cross-referencing the occurrences of divine names in specific surahs, he gasped. In Surah Ar-Rahman, where Allah's name, Ar-Rahman, is repeated at the start, the phrase, "Which of the favors of your Lord will you deny?" is repeated 31 times. He checked the al-Shari value of the word fatal, favor 31. His eyes stung unexpectedly, but logic still tried to resist surrender. So he tested something radical. He selected 10 random names and calculated their numerical values. Then he arranged them in sequences, checking if the sum matched verse numbers of major revelations. Twice it did, accidentally or intentionally, he wasn't sure. But one sequence stunned him. Al-Khaliq, 731, minus Al-Baysir, 112, equaled 619. He checked the verse 619, a ayah declaring the witness of Allah over all things. How could every connection be mere coincidence? As his nights stretched longer and his prayers awkwardly returned, a shift began in his soul. He wasn't just studying patterns. He was remembering something his heart had always known. Numbers were not replacing belief. They were escorting him back to it. One Friday, his uncle Hamid returned and found him still awake at 4. Papers were strewn across the desk, the Quran open, and Kareem's eyes rimmed with quiet astonishment. Hamid asked, "Have you found what you were looking for?" Kareem looked at him, voice low and steady, and said, "I think Abu left me a map, and I'm only now learning how to read it." That afternoon, he sat with his sister and shared everything he'd discovered. She listened with tears quietly gathering in her eyes. She whispered, "He would be happy to know you're seeing with both heart and mind." But the journey wasn't complete. The turning point came unexpectedly during Ramadan. He visited the masjid for Tarawih after years of absence. The imam recited verses from Surah Al-Hashr, including the sequence of Allah's names: Al-Malik, Al-Quddus, As-Salam, Al-Mumin, Al-Aziz, Al-Jabbar, Al-Mutakabir. Kareem felt the words enter him like light through glass. He closed his eyes and saw the numbers mapped in his father's handwriting. Each name, each value, each verse, now alive, not as code, but as calling. When the prayer ended, he didn't rush out. He sat against the wall of the masjid and cried quietly, his face hidden in his hands, not out of despair, but out of relief. His rational mind had not been defeated. It had been led. But Allah wasn't done showing him signs. A week later, he was invited by Zayd to a small halakha where a scholar discussed the numerical symmetry of the Quran. The scholar mentioned that the word day, yom, appears 365 times, the word month, shar, appears 12 times, and the word 7 heavens appears exactly 7 times. Kareem felt chills run up his spine. Even the word sea appears 32 times and land appears 13 times. And if you calculate the percentage, 32 out of 45 is 71.1%, which is exactly the proportion of water on earth. His heart whispered, "How many signs do you need?" That night he returned home and opened the Quran randomly, landing on Surah Ar-Raid. Allah knows what every female bears and what the wombs lose or exceed. For everything with him is by due measure. Due measure, qadr, precision, calculated design. He thought of his father again, remembering the night he'd asked him as a teenager, "Why 99 names? Why not 100 or 150? His father had smiled and said, "Because nothing of Allah is random. Even what you think is small is measured with mercy." One afternoon, while organizing his father's notes into a proper digital format, he stumbled upon a folded paper tucked inside a book on tafsir. It contained a single sentence in his father's handwriting. "When your heart is ready, numbers will no longer be numbers. They will be sujood." He set the paper down and closed his eyes. The journey had changed him in ways no lecture or debate ever had. The faith he once wore loosely like a cultural garment had become a living pulse in his chest. And then something happened he could never have predicted. As he compiled all the al-Shari values and notes into a single document, his program crashed halfway. When he reopened it, only one sentence remained unsaved and intact at the top of the file. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Almost as if the system had preserved that phrase deliberately. He stared at it, stunned. The phrase, whose al-Shari letters total 786, used by millions unconsciously as a symbol of blessing, standing alone like a signature of the divine. His resistance finally melted. The grief of losing his father twisted itself into gratitude for the legacy he'd been handed. He began to pray again, not out of fear or habit, but out of realization. In sujood, he found the silence where numbers dissolved and presence unfolded. And then, he did something he'd never imagined. He decided to write a book, not for fame, not for debate, but as a continuation of his father's whisper. He titled it, "The Calculus of Divine Names, A Journey from Proof to Prostration." But before he published, he visited his father's grave. He sat on the cool earth and whispered, "Abu, I saw it. I see it now." A breeze moved through the trees, carrying the scent of soil and memory. And for the first time in years, Kareem felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Weeks passed, but Kareem's nights were no longer restless. They were sacred. He had turned his study into what he jokingly called his numerical masjid. On one wall, he had pinned the 99 names of Allah in Arabic calligraphy. Beneath each, their al-Shari values. But it wasn't about numbers anymore. It was about remembrance. Each number now felt like a heartbeat, each equation like a tasbih bead in his fingers. He began to understand what his father meant when he wrote that numbers can do sujood. It wasn't that mathematics proved Allah. It was that mathematics bowed to him. One night, while he was writing about the word qadr, he realized something astonishing. The word itself appeared in the Quran exactly the same number of times as the concept it represents: measure, decree, destiny. When he traced each verse mentioning qadr, it was always tied to precision, balance, and mercy. Allah wasn't a god of randomness. He was the master of measure, al-muqaddir. He thought about the universe, how everything obeys laws: gravity, light, atomic ratios, Fibonacci spirals and leaves, mathematical symmetry in snowflakes. He whispered, Subhanallah, under his breath. For the first time, that phrase wasn't an expression, it was a realization. Zaid visited again one evening. Karim showed him a spreadsheet of Quranic occurrences, al-Shari values, and verse frequencies. Zaid scrolled through it silently, then leaned back in his chair. You know what's crazy? He said. This data could have been rearranged by anyone centuries ago, and yet it's been recited the same way by millions for over 1,400 years. Every letter, every vowel, every stop. That's not mathematics, bro. That's preservation. Karim smiled faintly. Preservation through perfection. He then said something that made Zaid pause. You know, I think Allah wrote the Quran not just in words, but in balance. Later that night, Karim went outside to the terrace. The sky was scattered with stars like glittering equations written by the divine hand. He thought about his father again, a man who never owned a computer, yet somehow left behind a trail leading his mathematically minded son back to Allah through patterns no algorithm could explain. He whispered into the quiet night, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. His tongue trembled slightly. He felt warmth spreading through his chest, not from logic or discovery, but from love. That was the hidden miracle his father wanted him to see. Knowledge without love is data, but knowledge with love becomes worship. A few days later, during Jumu'ah, the Imam recited, Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the alternation of the night and the day, are signs for people of understanding. Karim smiled. People of understanding. That was him once, a man who thought understanding was only numbers. Now he knew. Understanding was seeing Allah's signs within numbers. As the months went by, Karim's research reached beyond al-Shari. He noticed linguistic balance too. The Quran mentioned life and death the same number of times. Angels and devils appeared equally. Man and woman, equal. World and hereafter, equal. How could all of this symmetry exist in a book revealed across 23 years, in different places, to different audiences under different circumstances? He wrote in his journal, the Quran is not read, it is recited through existence. Every pattern he found pointed to a creator who authored not just scripture, but the language of creation itself. Even the structure of Surah Al-Ikhlas mirrored binary perfection. 4 verses, each representing unity, negation, affirmation, and eternity. It was mathematical tawhid. One evening, his sister Miriam walked in again. She found him gazing at a chart of the 99 names, tears quietly rolling down his face. You've been crying a lot lately, she teased softly. He laughed through it. Yeah, he said, turns out even numbers can make you cry. She asked him gently, do you think Abu knew all of this? He looked up. Maybe not the details, he said, but he knew the destination. That Ramadan, he decided to share his journey publicly. At his local masjid, he gave a short talk titled The Mathematical Mercy of Allah. He began nervously, but soon found his voice flowing naturally, as if his father's spirit was guiding every word. He spoke about how every name of Allah had a numerical and linguistic pattern that reflected its meaning, how even Ar-Rahman's structure, rooted in Rama, and frequency in the Quran reflected abundance, while Al-Adl's patterns reflected balance and fairness. The audience was silent, not from boredom but awe. Afterward, an elderly man approached him and said, My son, I've been reading Quran for 50 years, but today you made me see that even its silence speaks. Karim went home and fell into sujood. This time, he didn't ask for proof, guidance, or peace. He simply said, Ya Allah, you are the proof, you are the guidance, you are the peace. As his forehead touched the ground, he remembered his father's last words. One day, numbers will lead you to sujood. He whispered, They did, Abu. They did. From that night, Karim's life took a quiet turn. He continued teaching mathematics at the university, but now every equation he wrote on the board began with Bismillah. His students found his lectures different, softer, deeper. He didn't preach religion, yet somehow his lessons carried it. When he explained symmetry, he mentioned Surah Ar-Rahman. When discussing ratios, He quoted the balance in Surah Ar-Rahman. He raised the sky and established the balance, so do not transgress in the balance. Years later, he finally finished his book. The dedication read, "To my father, who taught me that Allah's mercy is measurable, not in numbers, but in signs." It became a quiet success in Islamic circles. Scholars appreciated his blend of mathematics and Iman, and youth who once questioned faith began to see the Quran as not just divine poetry, but divine precision. Some even created apps visualizing the numerical beauty of Allah's names, each name glowing with its al-Shari value, frequency, and meaning, forming living constellations of Tawheed. Kareem would sit back sometimes and watch the world rediscover what his father had whispered decades ago. There's a map of mercy inside every letter revealed by Allah. The story ended where it began, with a son, a notebook, and a name. But now, that notebook was preserved in his study, under a framed calligraphy piece that read, "Wa kullu shay'in indahu by qadr," and everything with him is by precise measure. Surah Ar-Rahman 13:8. As Kareem sat one evening reflecting on his journey, his phone buzzed with a message from his sister. A photo of the old study room where it all began, cleaned and softly lit, with a note, "Abu's legacy lives on." He smiled, whispered "Alhamdulillah," and returned to his work. He didn't need another sign. His life itself had become one. And perhaps somewhere, unseen, the angels who had once watched his doubts now smiled at his faith. A man who saw the miracle of Allah, not through visions or dreams, but through numbers that bowed to the divine. Because in truth, the mathematical miracle behind Allah's names wasn't meant to be calculated. It was meant to be felt. Every sign, every atom, every equation whispers his name. The Quran isn't just recited. It's calculated by the Creator himself. Subscribe to Deeninminute and uncover more miracles hidden in plain sight. Because when faith and knowledge unite, your heart becomes the true equation of belief.